Welcome back to the Block Fuel Podcast. Doing a solo pod today, but we have a great guest, John Linden, the founder and CEO of Mythical Games. So for those that are unfamiliar with Mythical Games, they are probably the biggest, backed by A16Z and many others. Just got a $37 million round and $150 million before that, valued over 1.25. So we got John in the booth today, fresh off of a trip to Africa as well. So got to hear about that. Welcome to Block Fuel.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
How was your trip to Africa? You just sounds like you were on helicopter rides and going to different events. It seemed cool.
It was good. Actually, there's quite a few kind of crypto VCs that happened to be on the trip. I guess we're all connected behind the scenes here. But no, it was fun. I actually used to try and go to Africa once a year. I felt like, especially when I was living in Los Angeles, it was a really nice kind of recovery from the entertainment gaming industry, just getting completely different, getting out into nature. I guess they now have the phrase touch the grass, right? Mm-hmm. It was literally touch the grass. And I always come back super inspired, got a lot of energy now, ready to go. It always seems to fully recharge me. So it's such a special place in the world. And if everybody ever has an opportunity to go, definitely try and get out there.
I've been to Morocco. I know it's North Africa.
Yeah, North Africa.
Very different vibe than probably where you were at. So Mythical's your fourth venture, actually. And you've had experiences with other companies, as I just mentioned, but have they all been like gaming and Web3 obviously being relatively new in the past decade plus? Were they semi-involved with blockchain, and what kind of brought you into Web3 gaming?
Yeah, so I started my first company when I was 19 years old in 1997. So I just dated myself there, but I venture backed in 97. So it was like Web 1.0. It was actually almost like more like Web 0.5, I think, back in the day. So it really started off with what we called them online communities back in the day. Now it's social networks, social media. So his first company was a company called Planet Alumni, and we ended up selling it to the guys that made MySpace. So it's like even pre-MySpace days, which is that old. So that was first company. I did a couple in ad tech then. So I had a company in ad tech, early advertising days. We were one of the earliest to do click fraud validation and real-time bidding, and which is pretty much standard now in the advertising industry. And I did that for a while, and then was going to take a break. And my goal was to take a year break. I think I made it 6 weeks, and Activision came calling. And I had been a long time gamer, never been in the game industry. And they were really looking for someone that understood mobile and cloud computing. At the time, I was on the customer board of AWS. We were a top 10 customer of Amazon Web Services, like way early, 2006, 2007, something like that. So jumped headfirst into gaming and never really looked back. So as a studio head at Activision for many years, a lot of people know that around Call of Duty. Did a project with Skylanders, and then ended up, when we left there, had a mobile game company. So that was my first kind of our first gaming startup. And we did mobile games. We had a big game there called Marvel Strike Force, which is still owned. I think it's owned by Scopely. It's Savvy now out of Saudi Arabia. But that game was huge. It did really well. We did a lot of other branded deals there. We built the Millennium Falcon ride for Disneyland, Disney World, which was really, really cool project. We did a Jeopardy voice recognition game you could play along with the show that won an Emmy. We did a Magic the Gathering game. We did a Blade Runner VR game. We did a lot of really fun projects. And then sold that to Niantic in 2018. Yeah, it sold in 2018 to Niantic that makes Pokemon Go. And that's when I started Mythical. So first venture, early venture, I'd say we were one of the first in Web3. In fact, I think we hold I think 95 patents in the space. We were that early that nothing was patented or anything. So we actually hold the patent for video game assets on a blockchain. It's been early days. So we were very, very early, and really been building Mythical for the last 5 years.
So you guys have some amazing partnerships we'll get into, but just to tease it out for those listening, NFL, Pudgy Penguins, and many more. What is Mythical Games? For if you're talking to someone at the bar you just meet and someone's asking you what you do, how would you summarize it? A quick elevator pitch, essentially.
Yeah, I think what we're doing at Mythical Games is really, we've seen a lot of trends in the gaming industry over the last 15, 20 years. And I think what Mythical's trying to do is really create the next generation. So we're creating what I think are the most disruptive tech that'll really affect gaming for the next 20 years. And I think one of those big pieces is ownership, right? I really very much believe in the concept of digital ownership, the concepts of how digital ownership is tied to identity. And we're really been building a platform, the Mythical platform, that really encompasses that. I'd say we probably have 2 additional products on our radar that we want to launch before we're done. But we see this whole new world of everything from how the games are distributed, how they're played, how the economies work, how people are interacting with games from a creator economy type piece. We think it's all going to be very heavily revolutionized. And that's really the focus of Mythical. So we're known for some of the games we made so far. But at the end of the day, we really want to be a platform. And we've been building this platform. It's interesting watching the world of Web3. It seems like everybody starts as a platform and then they're trying to get games on the platform, which is very different than what we do in gaming, right? All the gaming platforms started off as games, successful games, and then you build a platform around the game. And we've been taking a little bit more of that approach. We want to have several games out there right now to be able to pull the levers and understand the economies and see how do we really effectively implement this with consumers and with the brands and with the IPs. And then from there, then release it as a platform for others to use. So I'd say we've been going a little bit the opposite direction of a lot of companies in Web3 that we started with games and then ending up with the platform.
Yeah. And we'll get into like the GameFi and SocialFi elements here in just a second, but I mentioned the NFL partnership, Pudgy Penguins collaboration. Can you share a little bit more about both those two, as well as any other games that may be recognizable for the average listener?
Yeah, so we start off with a game called Blanco's Block Party, and we really wanted an original IP. Original IPs are very, very difficult to do. It's very hard, especially to get them to mass scale. They cost a lot of money to make. But the reason we chose original IP is we wanted to have no rules in what we could try, right? And generally, when you work with big brands, they're big brands for a reason, right? They have a canon, they have lore to it, they have a lot of very important things to their own brand. So when you're playing with a brand, you have to be a little bit more careful. But we were able to see with our own game first, Blancos, which originally came on PC. We're actually working at bringing that game out on mobile now, which we're excited about. And we've been able to now bring in several big brands. So I think we've announced two great ones, one in Web 2 and one in Web 3. So our first sports game was with the NFL. We started talking to them many years ago. And what I loved about the NFL, they're very innovative. They have such a powerful brand. Now they're mostly a US brand, right? That's a little bit of a harder challenge on a global Web3 world.
It's growing.
But I think they're the perfect brand to experiment with, right? And really understand how they were willing to kind of experiment. Like, how do we learn? How does this affect their player base? How does this increase fan participation? And I think we were able to navigate that pretty well. We just finished season 1, just kicked off season 2, and we're really, really excited about what's going to happen there. So I think I couldn't imagine a more perfect group in sports. We've been talking to some other sports leagues based on that success we've had. And I think you'll probably see another one before too long. And then Pudgy's been on the other side, right? Pudgy is, I think, the most incredible Web3 brand. I think they're the only real Web3 brand that has really been able to hit that mass market, that mainstream. I think what Luca and team have done with that have been remarkable. And that's exactly the type of brand we wanted to work with, right? Something that could be very native to Web3 and very innovative, but also can appeal to the entire planet, which I think we have with Pudgy.
What do you think it was, just to quickly double click on the Pudgy Penguins? Like, there's been a million NFTs, right? They did a phenomenal job. I agree with you of like licensing. The Walmart deal was like hit mainstream, of course. But just talking about them as a brand necessarily, or brands in general, like what did they do differently than some of the other big ones that were out there?
Well, I think give that credit back to Luca and team. Luca and team Luca's done this before, right? He's had other retail products in market that did incredibly well. And so he's young. He's a young guy. He's very brilliant on what drives consumer demand. And I think that's the key. The project, he didn't start Pudgy the very first day, right? He essentially acquired it from a struggling project. But what he saw in that brand is it could actually appeal to a mainstream audience. And I think that's really important, right? I think there's so many, I'd say probably even 95% of these Web3 projects that they're going to appeal to crypto users. But you take them to your niece or nephew or your cousins or your uncles or whoever else your friends that might be interested, and they're probably not going to understand it or even maybe even care. And I think what they've done is he was able to align around an art style, a lore, a brand that he could actually take to tens or hundreds of millions of consumers. And I think that's really the key. Some of them other ones are so technical. And I think honestly, the other thing he did really well is the Pudgies sell for a ton of money again, right? It's amazing how much money they sell for. But what he's been able to do is actually make it accessible. And I think that's been the brilliant thing he's done, is he's able to retain value that matters to the crypto Web3 world in these assets. He's been able to create an innovative business model around that, but he's made the brand accessible to everybody through the toys, through the Giphy images. I think they hit 25 billion images or something like that now, which is absolutely remarkable. So I view them as the triple threat already, right? Yeah. They've dominated the whole NFT world, but they're now starting to do really well and start to dominate the retail world. They're dominating the social world as well. And so they're already this triple threat. And I think what we want to do with them is obviously give them a fourth threat. We'll make them the quadruple threat with a gaming presence as well.
So you guys, is that what, I don't know if you're able to share like timeline on that collaboration. Is that 6 months out? Because for those that don't know, like I actually worked, I think I mentioned this last time we spoke, but I worked at a company called Arcadium, and it was just like fascinating to me as a human just to go in there and be like, holy shit, this takes like years to actually build a successful game. And there's so many little gamifications and little things that get people excited, and you don't realize it as the consumer. But once you start to go through that process, you're like, oh my God, everything just takes so long in planning. So with the Pudgy Penguins collaboration, is that something this year, or I don't know if you're able to share?
I can't give you the exact timeline yet. You'll definitely start seeing a lot more this year. I'd say it'll be early next year is the plan in that time period right now. So I'll leave that up to Luca and team to really fully announce that. But I think what's been really cool about it is, one, we've been talking to them for a while. And partly, again, a big partnership like this, you have to know the other team, right? You really need to know what you're getting yourself into. Yeah. And I think that's important both ways, right? They have a lot of creative, they put so much work into starting to build up that lore, and what does that brand mean, and how do their releases all, so how the releases all coordinate, which again is very Web 2 concepts, right? But that's really important. And I think what's great about that is that we've gotten to know them for a while. The other thing too is that most of the Web3 game companies are new. So when you're building a game from scratch, from that first line of code, even if you're starting on a great game engine, you're going to make some mistakes. Two, you don't have that library of resources, right? You go to the Activisions of the world and the EAs of the world, at least they have some starting places to start from, right? And you'll see a lot of games are built on top of engines from other games. And we actually are doing that. So we have taken part of the Blankos engine, and it's been forked off, and there's a team working on that with Pudgy, which is great. So we are able to have kind of a little bit of a jump start. We've seen what works. We've seen some stuff there, but we definitely always need enough time to truly customize it and make it their world. So we made it, I'd say we shortcutted it a little bit because we are sitting on a lot of IP and a lot of tech, but it still is its own game, its own world, its own everything, right? So it does take time to build, but we definitely shortcutted probably a year or two off that game.
Just real quick on that point, like AI is taking over every element of our lives slowly but surely. Curious, like how it's affected the gaming market. Are you able to make games faster? So like the basic code that may take weeks to put out now takes 30 seconds in a sense. Are you guys leveraging that at all?
To some degree, I think everybody is leveraging it across everything, right? So to me right now, I'd say the biggest area that's really been heavily optimized has been like concept art, right? Like we can knock out concept art almost instantaneously, which is great. And that takes a while. That was always a long process at the beginning of a project of really laying out that creative vision. What does the world look like? What's the feeling? What are the tropes, the pillars of that world you want to build, right? And I think that's been shortcutted heavily because now we can go from what's in our head to images on the screen in minutes, right? Yeah. Versus sending it to an artist and going back and be like, no, not that. How about this? And what about this type of style? And so that part has definitely been revolutionized. I think there's a lot of key systems that are getting pushed forward heavily with AI. I think we're still at the very basic days on what that'll do for games. So, and what I mean by that is things like rigging, right? Like pretty soon I've seen demos of people using AI to rig characters, and suddenly it's like, hey, make this character do the Beyonce single ladies dance, and it'll automatically do that. You don't have to mocap it and things like that. So I think that's really fascinating. It's still tools, I think, in the arsenal right now on how do you shortcut it. It's not necessarily go make this game for me and 2 days later I have a game, right? So it's still, games are still very heavily art vision, I think, for a true successful game. But so I think AI is influencing, it's not taking over, but I think we'll see a lot more. Everything from storylines to NPC characters to pretty much everything over time will have an AI influence. But I think we're also living in a world 2D images versus even 3D linear video. That's a pretty big order of magnitude difference in the complexity. Frankly, I'd say even OpenAI has shortcut that. I didn't think we'd see AI 3D videos like we're seeing with Sora and some of these other models. Flux, I think, is a new one now. That's been shortcutted. I feel like we're 3 to 5 years ahead of where I thought we'd be. 3D, though, is another order of magnitude because it isn't directed, right? With linear video, you're coming in one direction. You don't really care what the back of my head looks like unless there's a specific shot of that, right? And in gaming, you do because you have free will of moving around these worlds, right? So I'd say 3D is the hardest to conquer just because of the infinite possibilities of what you might need to do. But I think I originally thought 3D, full generative AI 3D, I thought it was probably 7 to 10 years out. Now I think we're thinking like 2 to 3 years out.
Yeah.
So it's moving much faster than I think any of us ever thought.
It's remarkable. We don't need to get into it because I think everyone's hearing about it constantly anyways. But yeah, to say the least, like my brother is starting a coffee company, and within 10 seconds, 15 seconds, I was able to give him like 3 different renderings of like different images it could look like. And he was blown away, and I got him on ChatGPT. I got him on the pro plan, and right after that, he's been using it ever since. Can we touch on GameFi and SocialFi? We brought a few folks from the SocialFi side on the podcast previously, and a few games as well. But can you just quickly touch on what that is, and then how are you guys leveraging those? And I guess the third question there would be like, how do you envision these models evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, I think those are great. Those are definitely both areas we're heavily thinking about. So obviously we jumped heavily into the GameFi. I think GameFi for us is really, again, a little bit different. We're not as heavy into the DeFi and all that type of stuff yet. It's really more about how do we let consumers be part of the process, right? And how do we let them have ownership over some of their assets? I think the GameFi will be the creation of the creator economy, right? I think we've seen some amazing things that Roblox and Epic have done. But I think truly the definition of GameFi, right, I think is really where we see the creator economy become the main economy over time, right? I think that becomes amazing. So GameFi is definitely where we've been focused. We've been focused very heavily around things like the marketplace, tech, and all that. And we're growing nicely. I think we're the number one gaming chain in the world now. We're doing more gaming sales and transactions than anybody else in the world already, which is great. And we're just getting started. I think we'll have in the next 12 months, I think it'll be a very different picture. So I think that's great. I think we're also now starting to see GameFi starting to infiltrate big games. There's games we're talking to now that have been in development for 6 or 7 years, like we were talking about, that are just now coming out, essentially. And I think that's going to be a big move for what that means. I also think we're still pushing the boundary of what GameFi is, right? And what does it mean to the consumer? And I'm excited about that. Things like digital supply chain or using kind of this DAO infrastructure for guilds and clans and things like that. I think that's powerful, putting that back to the consumer. So I think that's been our big focus so far. We are looking at shifting a little bit, not shifting, but we're adding to that, right? SocialFi, I think, is really fascinating. And social really drives gaming, right? Things like Discord, and before Discord, there was TeamSpeak, and before TeamSpeak, there was another one, right? There's been social applications and second screen and companion apps and all that have been really a big driver of interaction in gaming. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think there's amazing stuff we're going to see. I'll hint a little bit. We might have a product lining up from the foundation. So it's not necessarily a Mythical product, but we're one of the contributors into a SocialFi project right now. We're actually working with a couple other groups, one of them and 2 of them actually in Asia, to really say, how does this work? How do we change things like distribution? How do we change things like engagement and bring these concepts of trading assets, maybe not even just within a game, but across games, right? SocialFi is the right application for that. So SocialFi is definitely something we're very much working on. And really, we want to do it in a way that extends what everybody's already doing in GameFi, right? So to me, they build on each other very nicely, right? And I think that's a pretty interesting piece of the puzzle. And I think there's even a third piece, and maybe we'll talk about later, is this kind of concept of streaming. And I think streaming is a third piece that can be decentralized over time. And to me, that's a trifecta. When you have technically, you could call it DePIN. I guess there's a word now in Web3 for DePIN, right? So to me, I view it as kind of economic tech, social tech, streaming tech. I think the Web3 equivalents would be GameFi, SocialFi, and DePIN. And I think those 3 come together to create a very powerful trifecta of disruption.
Yeah, as well, working in Activision and working on Call of Duty, the arenas are just like massive, right? And we talked with Cornucopias, and they're, I think, as big, if not bigger. And so it takes a lot of power to keep that going, especially when you introduce like multiplayer and things like that. With the streaming, there's been Twitch has really helped out on the social front from that aspect. Is that an area you guys are looking into at all, with like live streamers using some of your games and talking to their audience?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out a little bit different play than that. So it's public record at this point. We acquired a company called Polystream about 2 years ago now. And Polystream, we were working with them, and unfortunately they hit a wall in their funding plan, and we just ended up picking up the entire company. So we're sitting on, I think, some very innovative streaming tech. Our view of that, though, is I think it changes a little bit. So right now, well, 2 things. One, why would we have bought that in the first place? Well, one, I think if you think about the consumers that are in gaming right now, right, it's an on-demand generation, right? They want music, it's on demand. They want movies, it's on demand. They want a video game, they have to go and download 80 gigabytes to a hard drive, and hopefully they have enough hard drive space. And the next time they load it, there's a 2 gigabyte update. It's not on demand, right? And it's not on demand because of technical reasons, because of these graphics cards, right? So it's a little bit different than, again, linear video. You can't buffer games. You can't do some of the things you can do with linear video or with audio. So it's a little bit harder project. There's been tech out there, right? Things like Stadia, things like GeForce Now, but they're incredibly, incredibly expensive because they require cloud GPUs. You're essentially running the game in a cloud and then outputting video, right? Well, the challenge with that is that GPUs are used for other things now, right? They're used for LLMs, they're used for generative AI, they're used for crypto mining. So the prices of those, I think the latest price is like $2.50 an hour. So, and you can't have more than one player on a GPU. So if I wanted 1 million people playing my game right now, I'd need 1 million GPUs in the cloud, which is a remarkable $2.5 million an hour. Like that's not even really that feasible for the Epics of the world, right? So there's a fundamental flaw in that. And I think what we bought a company that's a little bit different. They basically are using an edge GPU. We're actually rendering off the local phone or off the local PC or Mac, right? So it's a little bit different tech, but I think you can even take that a step further and decentralize that almost into this like proof of stream. And now you have a truly decentralized infrastructure that's accessible to everybody. So we're definitely thinking about that. I'd say we're another year out before we really think we can tackle that in any demonstrable way, but it does work. It works already. We have some games running and we can run games in the cloud and buffer them, and they're great experiences already.
It'll be interesting too. It's just can our power grid handle all this too?
The major investors right now, there's 3 or 4 theses I would be investing in right now. That's battery tech, power tech in general is definitely one of them. That's always an area we need to be moving forward in everything in life, not just gaming, obviously, but just everything we will have a power issue over time for sure.
So last question here, just like what do you see the future of blockchain in general in gaming, and do you see this world in which like we'll remember Web 2, but is it we're going to all start living in this Web 3 world? Activision and some of these other companies may see like the success you guys are having and the power that it comes with building out the community within Web 3 beyond. Yep. One thing we always talk about is this proliferation of Web 3 will happen when you don't realize you're using it. So curious if you feel that same way, and what would you see the next, I always say next 5 to 10 years, but in blockchain, that's 5 to 10 months is how you have to look at things.
I see a couple of things. One, I think with the interesting thing about Web3, and I'm going to take out just the money. I'm going to focus on the money part right now, right? So not the digital identity. Digital identity, there's some very pure concepts that I think have always been very pure. But you take out any type of programmatic money and you're going to get fraud, right? And I think that's been the challenge. Is there's a lot of people have viewed it as a quick buck, right? Like, hey, and then obviously fraud comes in, right? And I think that's tainted the industry a little bit. I think it was very easy for people to scam people. I had a Bored Ape stolen, and I feel like I'm an expert in the space, right? Or at least know more than an average consumer does about Web3, and I still got taken advantage of. So I think there's a lot of challenges there that have to be solved before anybody feels comfortable with it. And I think there has to be real use. Like there can't be. I think the days of just having a gamified economy is not that interesting. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing real examples. We're seeing real economies being built. And a great thing for NFL rivals, honestly, I think when we started the game, the first few months of the game, we were seeing about 15% of the revenue, the net revenue that come into that game. 15% was from Web 2 or Web 3, right? So 85% of it was Web 2, 15% of it was Web 3. And that's great. Honestly, a lot of developers would take 15% increase in revenue, right? Yeah. But it's a lot of work to get that done. Now we're seeing over half of our revenue is now from Web3 trading fees. And that is really, really powerful. When we can out monetize a Web 2 version of a game 2-to-1, that gets really powerful. And I think as that continues to flourish, you're going to see everybody looking at it in some way, right? So I do think it'll infiltrate a lot of things, but I think it has to be done right? We've even seen big companies that came in like a Ubisoft even, right? They made a quick push on it. I don't think they quite integrated it to the way they wanted to be real honest. I don't think it was a mistake on their part. I don't think they did it wrong. I just think they didn't really have the ability to put it in exactly the way they wanted to. And it was just bolted on and they didn't like it and the consumers didn't like it. So I think it has to be done in a big way. And I think you're seeing companies like that, the Square Enixes and the Ubisofts and the Segas and even the Take-Twos, they're all looking at different plays. I'd say almost every company out there has something they're learning from at this point. Take-Two might not be building this into GTA 6, but they own Zynga. And I know Zynga's been playing in the space, right? and Square Enix has been playing in the space, and Krafton's been thinking about the space. And I'd say nearly everybody has been at least exploring it to understand it. Yeah. And I think as we see more examples, and we just like last year, we saw 5 million players in our game. FSL out of Japan, they had 5 million players in Steppen, which is great. We're starting to see games actually hit, I think they hit 3 to 4 million players. I don't think they're more than that, but around that. So we're starting to see games in millions of players. My prediction is I think we might have a game next year that would be definitely in the tens of millions, if not maybe 100 million players. I don't know. I think it's proven examples of gameplay that have gotten into those levels and proven brands behind that level of gameplay. That'll start changing the narrative really fast. If you start having 10 to 20 million people a day interacting with these economies, that's a whole different world, right? So it's definitely going to evolve. I think you're going to see a lot more innovative uses come out of it. And we're seeing most of the networks are opening up to it. Apple, Google are cool with it. Epic's cool with it now. PlayStation and Xbox are opening up. So I'd say most of the platforms are getting comfortable now. And there's been enough kind of data and security and expertise and kind of foundational rules put in place to protect consumers, which I think is great.
Well, it's cool. You get enough people knocking on the doors, eventually NFL's going to listen. People may not even think about Web3 with the NFL, but the NFL's now done London games. I think they were in Germany last year. I think they're doing Brazil this year, Mexico.
Yep, Brazil this year.
That's even expanding. And that's what's cool about the NFTs, where I see it really taking off, is like every ticket should be an NFT, in my opinion, right? And you could go gamify your experience at the game, where it's like you go get a hot dog, you get 1 point. And you could even do like little concession stands or little journeys or adventures that you have to go on, and you ultimately create this like loyalty around it as well. So super excited.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, again, it becomes this programmatic layer of doing business. And I think that's fascinating, right? It's one of my favorite things we ever did with Blankos is bringing in brands like Burberry and bringing in brands like Deadmau5 or Kellogg's Pop-Tarts, right? And it became this business development layer that they could make their own rules in this virtual world. And I think that becomes powerful. Same thing, I think, as you mentioned, like the tickets. Yeah, I'm positive tickets will eventually have NFT components to them or programmatic content to them, right? To where I now can come in and reward somebody. Hey, you see it all the time in stadiums, right? Hey, if you're holding the ticket and so-and-so scored a touchdown or a touchdown in the fourth quarter, you get a free taco, right? We've been doing that stuff from a consumer level, and there's a reason those things are still around, right? It drives consumer interest. Doing that digitally makes all the sense in the world, right? So I do think that we're getting there. I do think we have another tech that's happening now too. It's cool now to be able to take companies that maybe are building on different chains and all that. I think it's now the applications are starting to be able to talk to each other in a much more native place. Mythos has a token, and the initial implementation of the token was an ERC20 token. We now have a new implementation of that on Substrate, right? And you can go to a bridge and say, hey, move my tokens from this chain to this chain. And it's done, and it's permissionless, and it's safe, right? That didn't exist a year or two ago, right? So now you're starting to see things can start being portable. And it's not 100% yet, but we're making tremendous strides. And at some point when I can be like, cool, I can take my ticket from the Seahawks game, no matter what chain it's on, and there's a communication layer to get it into my game and then go to Taco Bell and check it in and scan it, right? Once you do all those types of things and you interconnect all these digital items, that's when the magic happens, right? You'll just see explosive growth because everybody's going to want to jump in on that, right? They're going to be like, wait a second, I want to offer that for my business. I want to be part of that consumer loop, right? So it's happening. It's I think people have a little bit of unrealistic expectations on how fast it happens, right? Yeah, and you got to remember too, like
with the NFL, I'm talking with a big time music exec next week, talking about music. Even I didn't know that there was like laws in place now because. I don't want to butcher what he was telling me, but it was basically like today voices are not copyrighted, right? So you see all these like Drake remixes coming out and things like that. So they're back and forth with the government trying to figure out what ultimately happens here. But it's exciting. I've been in the space now since 2017, which I feel like I'm early. And there's so many people since 2010 that have been in it that laugh at me being 2017. I still have friends that think this is bullshit and it's all fake, and I laugh at them in a sense. I'm like, come on over, learn about this. It's really exciting what's happening. So hearing things like the NFL, other potential sports leagues that you may be working with down the road, you guys are doing big things, and super excited to have you, John. That was awesome.
Thank you, man. I'm excited. Like I said, I think the next 12 months is going to be 10 times what the last 12 months were, right? And I consider keep seeing that happen over and over, right? So yeah, it's exciting to see what happens there.
We'll
So for sure,
we'll have to bring you back in 6 months or a year and see where you guys are at with everything. And
that would be.
it seems really
I would
cool.
love to be back. Like I said, I think we'll see if some of my predictions are right. We've been doing it. Like I said, you've been doing it for a long time. We're seeing things happen. I think it's just getting better and better for sure.
Are you going to Token 2049 or any of these events?
We are actually throwing a big event out there. Yeah. So we haven't had a presence at a conference for a long time. So we're going to be doing an event one night. So you have to, I'll send you the invite later.
So Jody, for
yeah,
sure.
There'll be some big announcements. There's some companies come together for it, and yeah, it'll be really fun. So I'll definitely be out there.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
See ya. Bye.
Take care.